own Paul Hogan will soon be a very huge star in England as well. And this is some of the Hogan that English viewers gotta look at.
For 30 years, Paul Hogan's wife stood beside him through poverty, hard labor, and the kind of struggle that builds an entire life together. She was there before the fame, before Hollywood, and before Crocodile Dundee turned him into one of the most recognizable men on Earth. But when Hogan walked onto the set of a movie in 1985, everything changed. Somewhere during filming, the married father of 5 found himself drawn to a woman he was never supposed to fall for. And by the time the cameras stopped rolling, his 30-year marriage was falling apart. Who was this woman, and what happened between them behind the scenes? The woman Paul Hogan loved for 30 years. Paul Hogan was not supposed to be famous. He was a bridge painter from the working-class suburbs of Sydney, a man whose resume included rigging steel and scraping rust, long before it included movie premieres and red carpets. When he became a global star in the 1980s, he brought his wife along for the ride, and the world assumed they would grow old together. But the woman who stood beside him for 3 decades would be replaced by someone he met on a film set. And the way that replacement happened still surprises anyone who hears the story. Paul Hogan met Noeline Edwards in 1958 at the Granville Olympic Swimming Pool in Western Sydney. At the time, neither of them had any idea that the future held fame or fortune. Hogan was working as a local lifeguard, managing the facility and keeping an eye on the swimmers. Noeline was just there to enjoy the water. The meeting was casual, unremarkable, and exactly the kind of encounter that happens thousands of times every day and usually leads nowhere. But something clicked between them, and that click set the course for the next 30 years. Their relationship followed a rapid timeline driven by intense young love, the kind of love that does not wait for careful consideration or practical planning. They married later in 1958, when both of them were still very young. This was common in working-class Australia in the late 1950s, when couples often married young and started families right away. Over the course of their early marriage, Paul and Noeline had 5 children together. The names were Brett, Clay, Scott, Todd, and Lauren, a full household of young ones who needed to be fed, clothed, educated, and loved. Raising 5 children would have been a full-time job for any parent, but Noeline managed much of that responsibility alone, while Hogan worked the kind of jobs that left him exhausted at the end of every day. Before fame found him, Hogan worked a series of labor-intensive blue-collar jobs to support his large family. Most notably, he worked as a bridge painter and rigger on the Sydney Harbour Bridge, a job that required physical strength, steady nerves, and the willingness to work at heights that would terrify most people. The pay was decent, but not generous, and the Hogan family lived in a low-income suburb of Sydney where money was always tight. They were heavily reliant on Noeline managing the household budget and raising 5 young children simultaneously, while Hogan worked long manual hours. She stretched the dollars, made the meals, kept the children in line, and created a home that Hogan could return to at the end of every exhausting shift. Hogan's big break came from a pure whim. In 1971, he appeared on a talent show called New Faces, but he did not appear as a serious contestant hoping to be discovered. He appeared simply to mock the judges, to poke fun at the entire concept of talent competitions, and to be the clever working-class guy who saw through the pretensions of show business. The audience loved him. The judges were amused, and that single appearance slowly opened the door to network comedy opportunities that would eventually transform him from a bridge painter into one of the most recognizable faces on Australian television. The sudden onset of local television success in the mid to late 1970s shifted Hogan from a predictable shift worker with a steady routine to a highly sought-after public figure. whose schedule was controlled by producers and directors. The mounting demands of television production schedules, combined with the loss of family privacy that came with any level of fame, caused severe domestic friction. Noeline had signed up to marry a bridge painter, not a television star, and the transition was not smooth. She did not want to attend parties with people she did not know. She did not want her children's faces in the newspapers. She wanted the life that Hogan had promised her when they married. A quiet life of work, home, and family. Not this chaotic new existence where strangers recognized her husband at the grocery store. By 1981, after 23 years of navigating sudden wealth and fame, the marriage fractured completely under the weight of these lifestyle changes. The couple separated quietly, avoiding the tabloids as much as possible. Then they went through their first legal divorce. 23 years is a long time to be married by any standard, and the end of that marriage should have been the end of their story together. But Paul Hogan and Noeline Edwards were not finished with each other. The reconciliation that followed surprised everyone, including, perhaps, the two people at the center of it. The reconciliation no one saw coming. After being separated for less than a year, both Paul and Noeline realized how extremely difficult it was adjusting to separate lives after being together since their teenage years. They had grown up together, raised 5 children together, and survived poverty and hard labor together. The habit of each other was not something that could be broken in a few months, and the loneliness of separation proved more painful than either of them had anticipated. Hogan openly admitted missing the stability of his family and the comfort of coming home to a woman who knew him before he was famous and loved him anyway. After brief private discussions conducted away from the prying eyes of the press, the couple agreed to give their relationship a second chance. In 1982, in a move that shocked the Australian media and confused fans who had already accepted the divorce as final, Paul and Noeline legally remarried. There was no big ceremony this time, nor a celebration. They quietly moved back in together, attempting to rebuild their domestic life from scratch as if the previous year of separation had been nothing more than a bad dream. The reconciliation was genuine, or at least it seemed that way to everyone who knew them. They had chosen each other twice now, and that choice felt like proof that their bond was stronger than the pressures that had broken it. From 1982 to 1985, Hogan went from being a well-known Australian TV comedian to an international star. But the timing could not have been worse for the marriage. Just as Paul and Noeline were trying to rebuild their relationship, Hogan's fame grew in ways neither of them expected. He became the face of the Australian Tourist Commission's massive global marketing push, a campaign designed to lure international visitors to a country that many Americans and Europeans had never thought about visiting. He filmed the legendary Shrimp on the Barbie television commercials targeted at the United States, a series of ads that single-handedly revolutionized American tourism to Australia. Overnight, Hogan went from being a familiar face in Australian living rooms to being a recognizable personality in American households. He used this newfound international fame to secure funding and finalize the script for an independent feature film project centered around an outback bushman. That project would eventually become Crocodile Dundee, a film that would make him one of the biggest movie stars in the world. But during the reconciliation years, the project was still just an idea, a dream that Hogan was chasing while Noeline waited at home. The staggering success of the United States tourism campaign meant that Hogan was frequently traveling internationally, flying to New York, to Los Angeles, and to London for meetings, appearances, and photo shoots. He left Noeline behind in Australia to manage their now older children. Children who still needed guidance and attention, even if they were no longer toddlers. Hogan's evolution from a domestic television star to a highly valuable international brand made their second marriage an object of extreme public curiosity and intense media pressure. The couple who had reconciled in private now found themselves living in a spotlight brighter than anything they had experienced during their first marriage. And somewhere in the middle of all that chaos, Hogan met a woman who would change everything. Her name was Linda Koslowski, and she was not supposed to be anything more than a co-star. The woman Paul Hogan fell in love with. In 1985, Linda Koslowski was officially cast as the female lead, Sue Charlton, for Hogan's new movie, Crocodile Dundee. She was an American actress with a resume that included serious theater training and a few small film roles. Hogan was an Australian television comedian who had never carried a feature film. On paper, they made no sense together. But movies are not made on paper, and the chemistry that would develop between them was something that no casting director could have predicted. They were introduced face-to-face for the first time during pre-production meetings, and the early interactions were not promising. The disparity between them was immediately obvious to everyone in the room. Koslowski was a Juilliard-trained New York theater actress who approached acting with strict, classical discipline. She had studied the craft, memorized the techniques, and learned to respect the rules of professional performance. Hogan was none of those things. He was an unpolished, improvisational Australian comic who had stumbled into fame by mocking talent show judges and had never taken an acting class in his life. He did not know the rules because he had never been taught them, and he did not care to learn them because his natural instincts had carried him further than most trained actors ever reached. Koslowski's initial impression of Hogan was highly critical, a fact she has never hidden in interviews. She found him aloof and closed off during their first script readings and professional interactions. He did not warm up to her the way she expected a leading man to warm up to his leading lady. He kept his distance, stayed in his own head, and gave her nothing to work with. She wondered if she had made a mistake accepting the role, and she worried that the film would fail because the two leads could not find a connection. Hogan, for his part, was not trying to be difficult. He was simply nervous. He had never acted opposite a trained professional before, and he did not know how to bridge the gap between her technique and his improvisation. The tension on set was palpable enough that director Peter Feynman noticed it and decided to intervene. His solution was deceptively simple. He made the strategic decision to shoot the movie in chronological sequence, meaning that the scenes were filmed in the exact order that they appear in the story. This choice allowed Hogan and Koslowski to get to know one another at the exact same pace as their characters. As the characters grew closer on screen, the actors grew closer off-screen. The artificial boundary between performance and reality began to blur, and neither of them seemed to mind. As filming progressed from the harsh Australian outback to the crowded streets of New York City, Hogan's natural, self-deprecating charm completely broke through Koslowski's initial defenses. She stopped seeing him as an unprofessional amateur and started seeing him as a man who trusted his instincts, because his instincts had never let him down. He stopped seeing her as a rigid Juilliard product and started seeing her as a woman who cared deeply about the work and about the people she worked with. The professional respect that had been missing in those early meetings finally arrived, and it brought with it something that neither of them had expected. The tipping point came during the filming of an iconic romantic scene by a billabong, a quiet body of water in the Australian outback that served as the backdrop for a moment of emotional connection between the characters. Production staff and director Peter Feynman later documented that this scene served as the real-world turning point for Hogan and Koslowski. The on-screen romantic tension that they were supposed to be pretending to feel spilled over into reality during the shoot. and it became obvious to the crew that their relationship had shifted from professional to deeply personal. The way they looked at each other between takes, the way they stood just a little too close, and the way their conversations continued long after the cameras stopped rolling pointed to something that neither of them was ready to name out loud. Despite Hogan still being legally remarried to Noeline, he and Koslowski began a full-fledged romantic relationship during the latter half of production in 1986. The decision was not made lightly, or at least that is what both of them have claimed in the years since. They tried to resist the connection. They reminded themselves that Hogan was married, that he had children, that he had already reconciled with his wife once and should not put her through another betrayal. But the emotional bond between them became completely undeniable, and the resistance eventually collapsed. By the time the film wrapped, Hogan and Koslowski were a couple in every sense that mattered. And the only thing left was for Hogan to tell his wife that their second marriage was over. The woman he had loved for 30 years, the woman who had raised his 5 children, the woman who had reconciled with him after their first divorce, was about to be replaced by a Juilliard-trained actress from New York. The relationship that began on the set of Crocodile Dundee would lead to one of the most publicized breakups in Australian entertainment history, and the fallout would leave Noeline devastated, Hogan conflicted, and Koslowski cast as the villain in a story that she had never intended to be part of. The downfall of his marriage to Noeline. While Paul Hogan has maintained over the years that the marriage to Noeline already had underlying cracks before Linda entered the picture, her presence on set definitely changed everything. The younger, glamorous American actress became the final catalyst that ended any real chance of a second reconciliation. The cracks in the marriage might have been repairable if Hogan had come home from the film and recommitted to his family. But he did not come home, because home was no longer where his heart lived. His heart was on location with Koslowski, and no amount of counseling or compromise was going to bring it back. Immediately following the global theatrical release of Crocodile Dundee in 1986, Hogan officially packed his bags, walked out on Noeline for the second time, and publicly aligned himself with Koslowski. The timing could not have been more painful for Noeline. The film that had made her husband an international star was also the film that had introduced him to the woman who would replace her. She watched from the sidelines as Hogan's face appeared on magazine covers around the world, often standing next to Koslowski, smiling in a way that she had not seen him smile at home in years. The public announcement of their relationship was a humiliation that no amount of divorce settlement could compensate for. The second legal split transformed into one of the ugliest, bitterest divorces in Australian show business history. Unlike the quiet 1981 split, which had been handled with discretion and mutual respect, this battle lasted for years in the courts. The reason for the intensity was simple. Noeline felt deeply publicly humiliated and abandoned after standing by him for 3 decades. She had been there when he was painting bridges and struggling to feed 5 children. She had reconciled with him after their first divorce, giving him a second chance that most women would not have offered. And he had repaid her loyalty by falling in love with his co-star and leaving her for the world to see. She was not going to make the exit easy, and she hired the best lawyers she could find to make sure that Hogan paid for what he had done. The asset split was incredibly complex due to the unprecedented financial success of Crocodile Dundee. The film had grossed over $328 million globally on a tiny budget of just $8 million. The math was staggering. An $8 million investment had returned more than 40 times its cost, and Hogan, as the star, co-writer, and driving creative force behind the project, was entitled to a significant portion of those profits. Noeline fought fiercely for a fair share of the massive back-end royalties and international film profits that Hogan had accumulated during their second marriage stretch. Her argument was straightforward. She had supported him through the lean years that made Crocodile Dundee possible, and she deserved to benefit from the success that her support had helped create. The Australian public largely turned on Hogan during this era. The man who had been beloved as a larrikin, a working-class hero who had made good without losing his sense of humor, was now seen as a middle-aged man who had abandoned his loyal wife for a younger American actress. The media widely painted Linda Koslowski as an American home wrecker, a woman who had come to Australia, stolen a married man, and destroyed a family. Hogan was criticized for abandoning his loyal working-class Australian wife the moment he tasted Hollywood superfame, and the criticism stung because it contained more than a little truth. The emotional fallout of the legal battle and Hogan's immediate public transition to Linda caused total psychological devastation for Noeline. She had given this man her entire adult life. She had borne his children, managed his household, stretched his paychecks, and forgiven his first departure. And now she was expected to step aside gracefully while he rode off into the sunset with a Juilliard-trained actress who had never changed a diaper or worried about making rent. The injustice of it all consumed her for years, and she spoke about it openly in interviews long after the divorce was finalized. Noeline later confirmed to the press that following the finalization of their second divorce, Paul Hogan completely stopped speaking to her, maintaining total silence for some years. The man who had shared her bed, her table, and her struggles for 3 decades became a stranger who would not return her phone calls. The children were caught in the middle, forced to navigate a relationship with a father who had left their mother for a woman their own age. The silence was perhaps the cruelest cut of all, because it suggested that Hogan had not just left the marriage, but had left the entire history behind. He wanted a fresh start, and a fresh start meant no reminders of the life he had walked away from. But the marriage to Linda Koslowski, the relationship that had cost him so much, would not provide the happy ending that Hogan had imagined. The woman for whom he had sacrificed his reputation, his relationship with his children, and his peace of mind would eventually become the source of a new kind of pain, and the unraveling of that union would prove that some patterns cannot be broken, only repeated. The marriage to Linda and the ultimate unraveling. Shortly after the second divorce from Noeline was legally finalized, Paul Hogan married Linda Koslowski on May 5, 1990. The ceremony was lavish by Australian standards and heavily covered by the media that had followed every twist and turn of the relationship. This was not the quiet wedding that Hogan had experienced with Noeline, nor was it the private reconciliation that had marked their second attempt. This was a full-scale celebrity event, complete with photographers camped outside the venue and magazines bidding for exclusive photos. The message was clear. Hogan was starting a new life, and he wanted the world to watch. 8 years into the marriage, in 1998, the couple welcomed their only child together, a son named Chance Hogan. The name was unusual, but then again, nothing about Hogan's life had been usual since Crocodile Dundee made him a star. Chance represented a fresh start, a child who would not be caught between warring parents or forced to choose sides in a bitter divorce. For a few years, the family seemed stable, even happy, as Hogan and Koslowski focused on raising their son away from the prying eyes of the public. Driven away by the hostile media environment and intense public judgment in Australia, where Hogan was still viewed by many as a man who had abandoned his working-class wife for Hollywood glamour, the couple uprooted their lives and relocated to Los Angeles, California. The move was strategic. They wanted to raise Chance in relative anonymity, something that had become impossible in a country where Hogan's face had been on television screens for 2 decades. Los Angeles was full of celebrities, which meant that no one paid special attention to any one of them. The Hogan family could walk down the street without being mobbed, and that freedom was worth more than any amount of box office revenue. They tried to sustain their cinematic romantic branding by co-starring in several films together. Crocodile Dundee 2 had been released in 1988, before their wedding, and it had been a massive success. They followed it with Almost an Angel in 1990, the same year they married, and finally with Crocodile Dundee in Los Angeles in 2001, a belated sequel that attempted to recapture the magic of the original, but fell short. The films kept Hogan's name in theaters, but they did not make Koslowski a star. She was always Mrs. Paul Hogan, the woman standing beside him, never the woman who stood on her own. Off-screen, they built an ultra-private, wealthy life in California, focusing heavily on real estate investments and supporting Chance through his schooling. The money from Crocodile Dundee had been invested wisely, and Hogan did not need to work unless he wanted to. As Hogan aged and gradually withdrew from the entertainment industry, major personality differences that had been hidden beneath the surface of their romance came to the forefront. The man who had charmed Koslowski on the set of Crocodile Dundee was still funny, but he was also set in his ways, resistant to change, and increasingly content to stay home rather than go out. Koslowski, who had sacrificed her own acting career to support his, began to feel restless. She later stated that she spent over 2 decades living entirely in Paul's shadow, losing her sense of self-identity as an actress and as an individual. She had not signed up to be a celebrity wife. She had signed up to be an actress, and somewhere along the way, that dream had disappeared. They realized, perhaps too late, that they had completely grown apart and possessed zero shared interests outside of their past movie success and their son. The chemistry that had ignited in 1985 had cooled into something closer to roommate status. They lived in the same house, ate meals at the same table, and raised the same child. But the passion was gone. Hogan has since admitted that he does not regret the relationship, but he has also acknowledged that long-term marriage is something he ultimately struggled to maintain. The patterns that had broken his first marriage to Nolene had repeated themselves with Linda, and the only variable that had changed was the name of the woman walking out the door. In October 2013, Linda officially filed for divorce, citing irreconcilable differences. The filing was amicable by Hollywood standards, which meant that both sides managed to avoid the kind of battle that had characterized the split from Nolene. The divorce was finalized in 2014, more than 2 decades after they had married and nearly 30 years after they had first met on that film set in Australia. The settlement saw Koslowski receive a lump sum payout of $6,250,000, along with absolute maintenance of her own independence and temporary occupancy rights to their shared Venice Beach home. She walked away with enough money to start over, which was exactly what she intended to do. Linda Koslowski entirely left Hollywood after the divorce. She did not try to revive her acting career or launch a comeback. Instead, she reinvented her life completely, moving into the travel and tourism industry and eventually remarrying a Moroccan tour business partner named Moulay Hafid Baba in 2017. Paul Hogan remains single and lives in Los Angeles with their son, Chance. He has publicly reflected on his love life with a candor that surprises many interviewers, stating that he is not a great husband, but that he is good early on. The admission is honest, perhaps brutally so, and it acknowledges what the evidence has always suggested. Paul Hogan is a man who falls in love easily, but struggles to stay in love. He does not regret the choices he made, but he has stopped making excuses for himself. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to click on the next video on your screen, like and subscribe to our channel for more updates.